Hello everybody and welcome to Organian's Puzzle Box. In today's tutorial, I want to talk about motion design. In a previous project that I've been working on and an ongoing project that I'm working on right now, it's dealing with motion design. And as of Unreal Engine 5.5, we now have a lot of tools to use this to our advantage. Now, one thing that people ask me to do is basically grow vegetation in a sequence. So in this particular tutorial, I'm going to show you the quick steps of how you can make trees grow out of the ground using motion design. So basically, with just a few tips and tricks, you are able to then create a scene in which you can actually make it breathe life as your sequence plays. There are still issues with motion design that you should be aware of, such as nanite meshes don't actually work as nanite meshes in motion design. Basically, the system will load them up as nanite meshes, but the materials may look wrong. The textures may not load properly. So take that with a grain of salt. But if you disable nanite on your meshes, then it will work and look just fine, but the performance may suffer. So please be aware of that small caveat. The best way for me to present this is by opening my scene in which I have this setup done. This is a World Forge project in which I have a few planes in here where I am generating those trees. I've also got a mesh over here where I'm generating some plants. But what you'll notice if I play the sequence, which I have already opened, is that as I slide this over here, then we're effectively growing the trees. You can see it right there. Okay, so if I move a bit more to the over in this position, you can see just over here when I press play, the foliage over here is going to grow, and so will these trees over here because they are animated. And then we also have the leaves showing up. So mainly our setup consists of generating a mesh in which we will spawn our trees from. So like in this particular case, just a plane. So we're just going to do that straight away just so you can actually understand how to do it. But one of the things that I would like you to do is first go into plugins and make sure that you type in motion design, and then you have in here motion design experimental. So enable that, and this should allow us to properly use it. Obviously this only works in Unreal Engine 5.5 and above. Once you do that, I would like you to add a basic shape in your scene, like a plane. You can see here I've just added a simple plane. There's nothing fancy about it. Okay, and it doesn't matter where the plane is, but predominantly you'd want this to be in the location of 0, 0, 0 in your world. But if you can't, like in my setup, because I've already got this scene all around, then anywhere you can drop it, that is fine. The next thing you want to do is go over here to selection mode and change over to motion design. And this will give you a new tab in which you can add a few things. The thing that you'll need is to go into actors and drop in a cloner actor. So just click it and then left click anywhere in your world. So I've just placed it there, and as you can see, it already spawned this cube. And if I close over the motion design, because I don't really actually need this panel anymore, with this cube selected over here, it's called the cloner. By the way, if you don't see the motion design outliner and instead you see just the normal outliner, you can press this button over here to turn on motion design interface. Although if you do this, by the way, and then you want to disable it, your engine will crash. And this happens in Unreal Engine 5.5 for me. I'm not sure if this will happen for you either. The same way that it does for me. But if it doesn't, that's great. But if it does, then I just wouldn't recommend you using that. Anyway, in the outliner, you've got the cloner over here, and we can now start sampling that plane that we've created. You can see that right underneath the cloner, there's a default cube, the default clone cube, and that's what it's actually generating over here. And the cube is hidden, so you can't actually see it. Now with the cloner selected, we can go over here where it says layout and change from a grid to a mesh. And then over in here, it will ask us to sample an actor. We're going to click this eyedropper and select the plane, although it might be difficult. There we go. Now I've selected it. And now you can see it's spawned all of these cubes on top of the plane. But the plane is very small. So I'm going to select the plane and actually turn its, both of its axes, the X and Y, to number 10. Okay, and this plane is not rotating in any particular way. It's actually quite flat. It just has a surface area of 10 by 10. Okay, Now with the cloner selected, you'll notice that these cubes are obviously kind of misaligned and all over the place, okay? It doesn't really matter, in the sense of like, it doesn't really matter what the cloner is doing, because if you do, if you rotate the cloner, if you move the cloner, it will just simply take all of the elements around it and push them around. So in theory, you'd like your cloner to match up in location with the plane. So if we select the plane and right click the location and press copy, then we can go back to the cloner, right click on the location and press paste. And now the cloner is actually properly aligned with the plane, but the rotation is off. So I'm going to click this button over here to reset the rotation. Now what you'll notice is that there's 4 boxes spawned in, 4 cubes, and they're all at the points of each vertices of the plane. And that's because when you click the cloner, you'll notice here that it says it's actually sampling the vertex data of the plane, which this plane has 4 vertices. Now, if we change this to triangle, for example, you'll now notice that it will try to spawn more, more of these cubes across the triangles of the plane, sorry. And if we change from lit to wireframe, it's not going to be very easy to see this, but this plane, which is right over here, you can see there, I'm not sure if it's actually visible, but let me just hide the landscape and we should be able to see then. And this mesh over here. And you can see this plane over here has 2 triangles, okay? So that's why it's spawning all of these elements. Now, switching back to our normal view, we can actually play further and refine this system. Like, for example, we want to spawn the trees, like I've said. So to do that, we have to bring in a tree in the scene and make sure that we put it underneath the cloner over here. So I'm using the Norway maple pack. So whatever tree you've got is going to work as long as the static mesh. So I'm going to open this and go into geometry, and then I'm going to select one of these trees. So let's say we take this tree and we drop into the scene like that. Okay, and you can see it over there. Now, if we select the cloner, right, nothing is happening. But if we take this tree that we just spawned into the world and drag it underneath the cloner, you'll notice that it won't allow you to do it. And this is because this tree is currently set to mobility of static. So you want to change that from static to movable. Once you do it, you can actually change it and add it to the cloner. And now the tree has disappeared because it's now loaded up into the cloner. And then when you do this, you might get a static mesh, whatever, loading screen, and that is getting ready. And now you can see it has spawned where the cloner is, but it's facing the wrong way. So you might be tempted to select the cloner and say, well, you know what, I'm just going to spin this around. Well, that wouldn't be correct, and it would obviously mess up everything. As you can see, the pivots of each of these trees is completely broken. Now I'm going to Control Z, and instead I'm going to go down here onto the cloner where it says Create Linked Effector under the Effector section. Once you click this button, it will create an effector here in the scene, which, by the way, you can bind to the cloner if you want, like that. Okay, and this effector, you can now change it from a sphere to unbound. Okay, and you can see that it's already coloring these cubes in red, but it won't color your trees because the trees already have a material in place. Now, this effector, if we change its rotation to -90, you can see that it's placing the trees going upwards like that, which is what we wanted. We also have this very odd tree that has just decided to go to that side for some reason. And I will explain why this is happening in a bit. But if we actually select the plane again, the plane that we're using to spawn the trees on, and sorry, not the tree, I wanted to say the cloner. And if we change over from the triangles to vertices, then we're only really spawning 3, 4 trees, or however many numbers we put here in the count. So we put in here 50, then we'll spawn more trees and more cubes. But it is trying to kind of alternate between how many cubes and boxes it's spawning in these 4 vertices. So one thing that we could do here is obviously delete the cube like that, and then this allows for more trees to spawn. But the trees will also only spawn on those 4 vertices, and as long as they have, then it won't spawn anymore. So I'm just going to undo to bring back the cubes because, they were quite cute and nice to have. But there's, the question here is, how do we get more trees to spawn in? And by the way, when you control Z like this, it might take a while for it to load because, there's a lot of meshes that it has to like go through and recalculate and so on. So I wouldn't recommend necessarily using control Z when working with these operations, but it really depends on your computer as well. But one thing that we could do here is we can add more vertices to the plane. So in order for us to add more resolution to the plane, we can actually remesh it. Now, one way to do this is to go into plugins and make sure that you have the modeling tools enabled, which you can see over here. If this is enabled, then you will be able to access the modeling panel. And then after that, just click on your plane, go over to your mesh, and then you can press the remesh button and you can already see just how many vertices it will add. So I'm just going to press accept. And this means that we have now remodeled this plane to something else, to like something that has a lot more resolution. It would be, useful for you to check. But unfortunately, right now, because I am using the default plane that I have just created through this shape system, this plane hasn't been edited at all because this is, basically Unreal Engine isn't allowing me to do it because it's considering this plane as being part of the toolset. So I have to effectively, like, if you look here, just if you check, if you press accept, you won't be able to see it, but on the right side, it gives me an error saying that this is a Unreal Engine content browser asset, so you can't change it. But what you can do is search for where it is over here, and then you can actually Control C to copy, then go back to your usual folder, let's say in here, right? And then I can paste, and this is my new plane, and I can take this plane and replace this one. So now remeshing it is quite easy. I can press accept, and all of a sudden we have a lot of new vertices onto this plane, but we're not seeing the effect yet because we have to update the cloner. So I'm going to click on the cloner and force update cloner. And as you can see, it's already now spawned a lot of trees. I'm going to change this count from 100 to maybe like 50, so we get a few less trees. Okay, but one thing about these trees is that they're extremely uniform in how they're spawned, even though they are random on the face here. And especially if we change from vertices to triangles, this is what happens. But I'll explain again, I'll explain why this is a problem when you use triangles. Why are they all like in all directions, right? Anyway, going back to vertices, we are going to select this, if the clone is selected, we're going to go and enable the range. And in this range, I am going to set a scale minimum to 0.3. So some of the trees are smaller than others, even though I'm using literally the same tree over and over again. And I can also have a rotation max. So I'm going to change this by maybe 5-10 degrees, which means that not all the trees are going to be shooting straight, so to speak. As you can see now, they're a bit more leaned as well. So you may want to toy around with this setting to make sure that every tree isn't actually bugging out on the floor. But right now, as you can see, not all of them are shooting up straight like an arrow, but instead they are leaning from side to side. And we can bring this plane further into the ground. And now the trees are obviously spawning from the ground instead of like visibly, from the surface. And if you want to hide the plane in, let's say in the viewport, or during gameplay, you can actually select the plane and type in hidden. And you can change this option where it says actor hidden in game. If you click that option, then this plane will disappear when you're in play mode, right? So by pressing G, you can go into sort of like the gameplay mode view. And as you can see, the plane is gone. Pressing G again will bring the plane, make it visible again. Okay, now there's some other things in here for you to understand. So what happened when we switched over to triangles? Why are they all going all over the place? Well, what happens is, based on how the triangles are being sampled, you could have your trees being spawned on various areas of that triangle face, which means that the trees kind of get this odd pivoting that's happening predominantly whenever you're using a mesh like this one here, which is a mesh that is not straight, it's a bulbous shape. So actually, just to show you an example on this, I am going to use one of these meshes, right? And I'm going to put it here instead of the plane. So take this mesh and I'm just going to drag it where the plane was, like that. Now, obviously, this is still causing a bit of an issue because we should probably add a bit more thickness there. There we go. Okay, now we go to the cloner again and we can force update the cloner. As you can see, the trees are all over the place, but this is also because it's, as triangles. So if we switch over to vertices, you'll notice that it still does it because now there's a lot of random vertices around this shape that are just pointing in various different directions, which is going to cause us quite a lot of problems. Okay, so this is why staying with a straight sort of like shape like this one is going to be a lot more useful for you to be able to create your animation. But then you might be thinking, well, I have a shape that's like, following the terrain. I have like this terrain that's deformed in many directions. How am I going to use a spawner that's across a landscape and, sort out this issue where I've got all these slopes, right? Well, this is what I'm kind of doing here with this particular shape. Basically, I'm building using the modeling tools a plane that just extends around the landscape and it's got various different deformities. I can even edit this as a spline so I can make it follow the landscape as I move around. And once I'm happy with it, I can then save it up and then use it with my cloner as a static mesh. But when you look at the cloner itself, you can see in here that it can actually spawn stuff straight onto a spline. So you don't actually have to, work too hard on making that work with a spline that's following the landscape shape. But I'm just showing you an example here of how to do it with a plane. Now, to get over to the animation side of things, of how we, how can we create this, I'm just going to quickly create over here a new cinematic level sequence. So ls tutorial maybe, so just so we know, I'm going to double click it and this is my new sequence, right? And in the sequence, I am going to add the cloner, the effector. I don't need the cloner. I'm just going to put the effector in here. And for the effector, actually, just to make it easier, I'm not going to just drop it in. I'm going to select it over like that. And when we have the scale, I'm going to press this button here, which adds a keyframe property over into the sequence that I've just created. So if we set the scale of this to, say, 0 here at the start, and then we go all the way here and we set it to 1, then that's when the trees will obviously have grown up. So now, as you can see, this is how they grow, right? They go from 0 to 1. This is obviously just scaling from the pivot point, but it is very, it's very satisfying to watch as they do this, as you can obviously make this a lot slower, which means that it might look a bit more believable, I guess. Now, in terms of the leaves, you might be thinking, well, where are the leaves and have you done that through this effect? Unfortunately, no, I didn't do the leaf through this effect. Instead, what I've done is I've edited the tree mesh itself. So what I mean by this, if I select the tree and double click on its leaves, which is this material here, you'll notice in the material shader itself, I have gone where the leaves are generated, which is in this material function. So it uses an opacity mask, right, to show us the leaves. So what I've done is I've added a material parameter collection or collection material collection parameter, which has a scalar value in it, which is this leaf growth parameter name, a scalar set to 0. And this is feeding into the multiply node for our opacity mask. And then I'm controlling that through the sequence. So what I mean by this is that I can go in here and press add, select material parameter collection. I'm going to type in here the name of the material parameter collection, which is leaf control. And then all of a sudden we can track the leaf growth scalar parameter. And you will notice that if I switch from 0 to 1, the leaves will grow. Well, they will appear, not grow, but you get the point, right? So 0 and then 1. Okay, so that's how I've done this effect, which is very, very abrupt because unfortunately this is an opacity mask. It is not simple opacity. So it's effectively a cheaper way of doing opacity. It's not using an alpha in the traditional sense, but it simply does the job nonetheless. So we could obviously animate this. This could be, set to 1 over here at the end of the timeline, something like that. But then over here, it was still a 0. So when we play the animation, this is when the leaves will start to grow. And obviously, as I said, the bigger you make this timeline, probably the better the effect is as it transitions into a system with leaves. That's kind of the gist of it. And it's, as I said, it's very interesting, very dynamic, and it just opens a lot of opportunities for you to do other more challenging things with this system. And if you want to support the channel, please take a look at my content on Patreon, on the Fab Marketplace, ArtStation, or the Gumroad. And on Patreon, for the price of a coffee, you get access to 50 plus projects for you to play with, ranging from space scenes to world creation tools and skyboxes and all sorts of cloud systems and so on. But I hope you found that tutorial useful. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something today. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you did. Please let me know what you'd like to see in the future. And as always, keep creating and keep going. And also, I would like to say thank you to my Patreons for supporting the channel. I couldn't do it without you guys. So yeah, I'll see you in the next tutorial.